All right. Hey, everyone that's already joined, we're just going to give it another minute to let a few more folks file in here.
Yeah, this is great.
And if you are here, please feel free to hop over on the chat. Let us know where you're joining from geographically. Say hello. Post any questions you might have initially here for our hosts.
That's awesome, Allison. Good to see you again, Allison. Just saw Allison at SEMA. I don't know, Huong, if you know Allison, but she runs the Event Content Council.
Yeah, that's right. Hi, Allison. I remember hosting a webinar with you during the pandemic. That was amazing. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, she just led a little panel at SEMA, and it's really, really interesting just to hear people's thoughts on how they strategically approach content. Really cool.
Awesome.
All right.
Let's see who else is here.
Well, we'll get it started here if you guys are ready. So my name is Ian. I'm the marketing manager here at Sessionboard. And thank you for joining our webinar today. It's from manual to modern. So it's all about tips for effective speaker management. It's a part of the process in event organizing that's often overlooked, and especially with stressed budgets coming out of COVID, trying to do more with less, you really need to have some effective strategies to implement to make sure that you're being efficient and effective when managing speakers, getting the best out of your events. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our very own Chris Carver, CEO of Sessionboard.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So these things are a lot of fun for me. As the CEO and co-founder of Sessionboard, our goal as a company is to save our clients, and our clients in this case are organizers, save them time. And so the more time we save our clients, the more value we create for the industry. So any chance I get as the CEO to be able to talk to folks like Huong, and Huong will introduce herself in a moment, the more value that we can create. And so I try as much as I can to chat with folks like Huong on a daily basis. And I really hope that the folks that are watching this, whether it's live or whether it's recorded, will also share their thoughts and experiences, because we'll take that back and definitely apply that to our product and just continue to add value. That said, for any of you that are watching this, if you're ever up for it, like a 10 to 15 minute call with you individually is my call to action, just to get feedback. It's not a sales call. It's just what you do in your day-to-day, the challenges, opportunities. A lot of what we're going to chat with Huong today about is huge for us. And so the more I can do that, the better the platform and the service will be. So I really appreciate everybody attending. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Huong, and if you don't mind you have a really interesting, incredible background and how you got to this spot. And I think that will, kind of, for those that don't know you, really shed some light on the tips and the strategies that you're going to share today.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Huong. I'm with Shiloh Events, CEO and founder. I have a huge passion for events, as I'm sure many of you all do as well. And, my goal in the event industry is to deliver peace. And Shiloh is a Hebrew word that means peace. When a client hires us, that's the goal, is that we want to alleviate the burden and the stress off of their shoulders, and they experience peace in the event planning process. And part of that and delivering it is to leverage event tech and leverage and delegate, all of, to different team members. And so back when I started Shiloh in 2013, there was not a lot of tech, right? Like 2013 was CVent and eTouches. And everything, a lot of what we do was manual, like especially speaker management. And there was a whole, a large Excel sheet with a lot of speakers, presentation links, where to upload them, their bio profile, headshots, deadlines, and like multiple emails going back and forth. It was a headache and still a headache today, right? But then you fast forward 10 years and now there's more than 800 tech to choose from, including Sessionboard. The unique thing about Sessionboard is that we were able to implement it into our own speaker management process and eliminate a lot of that cumbersome process and steps. So I'm hoping in you guys listening to me today is I want to first commiserate and experience a pain point with you and share some of our war stories of when we manage speakers and what those like scars are, and then share with you guys 10 steps on how we manage speakers, and then having you guys do some of those takeaways. And then lastly, strategies on eliminating the inefficiencies of speaker management. So I'm hoping that will be some really great actionable insights for you.
Yeah, and Huong's been great enough to be able to put those in slides that we'll be able to share with folks. So there's some actionable insights, and everybody taking the time to either join us today or watch this because it's definitely really helpful. And I thought in kind of doing this, the war stories or the pain points are a great place to start, because I think it's only going to make the advice and the tips that much more helpful. So again, with as our goal to save time, I think it's always important to really start to look through every step that you all go through on a regular basis in planning for an event. And in our world is obviously managing content, sessions, and speakers. So I think it's really fascinating when you kind of take it in bite sizes and you look at some of the basic problems along the way. So, even sitting on talking to some folks last week at a conference, there's a number of little problems in the speaker discovery process, even trying to figure out what past speakers you have in your arsenal to potentially bring in, and how you find those, to managing and communicating with evaluators. That's, for some, that's a beast in and of itself, and making sure the evaluators are doing things on time, just like your speakers are doing things on time, and dealing with multiple types of speakers, or multiple speaker types, I guess, and then ongoing communication with them. It's just so many micro steps along the way that it's going to be really interesting to hear some of those challenges that Huong and her team constantly face, and how they approach some of this. And again, that's everything, again, on going through that workflow, from making sure that the speakers know what to do, to making sure even the speakers are marketing the event appropriately. So Huong, I'd really love you to dive into some of those challenges and some of those war stories that you experience quite a bit.
Yeah, in every event, there's always speakers, always, right? Whether you're managing 5 or 50, and it's a real headache. And so some of the, like number one, there's multiple types of speakers, and that can even be super complicated, because there's pre-recording, like pre-recorded speakers versus live speakers. And that in of itself has multiple steps on like working with them to make sure that their content is up to par, and you're filming and then you're editing and going back and forth. Then there's keynote speakers versus breakout speakers, panelists, fireside chat, and remote versus check-in, right? And then each of those speakers, you have to create unique know before you go for every one of them, that has there's times, there's slots, and like where they're speaking, and then even on site. So that is a huge headache of managing all the process from the beginning to end. Keeping track of emails, for an example, all the emails back and forth. And then when speakers don't read their emails, it's like eye roll, like, come on, I've sent you this so many times, and I have to send you the links again and again. And then you have solo speakers versus dual speakers who are tag teaming back and forth and making sure that they're rehearsing, right? And then it goes into the rehearsal schedule. And, in the rehearsal in of itself, it's an entire event, because you have so many different time slots that you have to get people to, to be fitted within. And then when they don't show up, especially C-level execs who don't think that they need rehearsal time, and they don't show up, but they show up the day of the event 10 minutes before and say, I want to run through my slide. You guys have experienced that before, because we for sure have. And then it pushes the event back. So as event planners, a lot of times we're people pleasers, and we try to say, okay, we want to accommodate, but there has to be some point where we have to draw boundaries. And the processes help us stay within those boundaries, because boundaries protect us. It keeps us safe, and it keeps our mental health in check as well. Other pain points would be templates. There's so many different templates that we have to do, as like, for example, presentation templates for keynotes may be different for breakouts. And a lot of times, speakers want to push back and do their own templates, and we have to accommodate that. Content review, back and forth. Sometimes they send you content that is 45 minutes long and they only have 30 minutes. And then how do you really manage that expectation on site of like, excuse me, only 1 minute left. Content review between the clients and the speakers, but also between us and the client, and us and the speakers to, send out those slides to AV and making sure that it's 16:9 and the videos work. I had a story where, I was presenting and I thought I gave my slides, and I was a speaker, and I'm totally like guilty of this. I gave my slides to the AV company, but it didn't have the video. And so when I was on stage clicking, my video didn't show up. But that's, obviously that's on me. And so I understand and empathize from a speaker perspective. It can be a lot of work for them too. And so when we design our processes, we keep all of that in mind, both being empathetic towards the planners, the clients, and the speaker side. And so those are some of the pain points that I have. I think mainly what it all boils down to is a couple of things. It's not having the resources to really help us execute. I mean, we have the Excel, the Word docs, the Google Drives, right? But it's all manual work. Like, we have to still move people along through those steps. Another thing is lack of a system. A lot of times our clients have these, 50 to 100 speakers, but there's no process. There's no way of like, well, what's next? And then speakers don't know, well, what do you need from me? And it's all through email. But again, it's hard to manage those emails if the speakers are C-levels and they're super busy. And then another thing too is teamwork. I mean, that's another thing that we're experiencing is there's not a lot of hands on deck. Teams are shrinking, people are shifting jobs and then training. So being able to delegate is also an issue. And I put in the chat there, if you guys resonate with any of those issues, please let me know. And then I want to hear some, from you guys, what some of those issues that you have experienced as well. And Laura, you said with so many platforms, Teams, Cvent, email, it's hard to pick up how to communicate with them. I totally agree. And then you have Slack and Zoom, right? So totally agree. But yeah, those are some of my pain points.
Yeah, I love that. A lot of what you said kind of validates basically my 2.5 years of my life, working on Sessionboard. So that's really incredible. I am curious, as you start to sift through this, do you kind of start to allocate time for certain team members to focus on any one thing, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, so I'll share with you guys very soon about our 10-step process. But what we do is we break up those process and people own certain phases. So in the very beginning, the very first phase we do is a call to speaker, right? First we identify the agenda, what we need to fill speakers, where we need to fill the speakers. And the call for application is like a whole in of itself process, because there's so many applications. You have to read through them and like rate them, accepted or not. And then if they deny, then you have to have backups and alternatives. So it's in of itself an entire process. But so we basically parse it out by phases. Once we accept the speaker, then it goes into another set of team members who then manages and curating all the assets that's required. And then after that, it goes to another phase of content review. And that is more strategic in terms of like making sure the content is in alignment with your key messages, and it's not too salesy or pitchy. But and then also the next phase after that is making sure your speakers are coached very well, because people may want to speak, but they don't have the skill set to be energetic and charismatic. So what you don't want is the speaker on stage that is like a yawn fest. So there's a lot of vetting that has to go through. But I get it. There's some programs that don't have the luxury of that time, right, to go through all of those single steps and making sure they have the right speakers. So it's some programs would just be like, well, I just need someone to talk about this for sales kickoff, or my CEO needs to get on stage, but the CEO isn't really charismatic. So there's a lot of nuances as well. Like you have to really read the situation and figure out what resources you have to make sure that the stage presence is strong. And again, there's some programs like Allison, you work on great programs that have the budget to coach and really have time to go through the content. And that's amazing. That would be, that would require a lot of hands-on too.
Yeah, I didn't mean to jump the gun here. I would love for you to talk about, go through your, internal process in a little more detail. I know you have several steps that you're going to share, and I think that would be really interesting for folks as a takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, at first I want to address what Allison wrote in the chat was like, we staff up for speaker management even with an automated process. That is so true, right? Like about 100 speaker per manager. I mean, that's pretty much a good quota for us. We work on programs that ranges from 50 to 100, and even 100 speaker per manager. That's, oh my God, like that's a lot of people to be going back and forth in. And if we can reduce that, I like that question, Allison. If there's any way to reduce and delegate, that would be amazing. And I think the way to do that is leveraging event tech. Like we really need to get out of our comfort zone and take time to study and go through that learning curve of figuring out how event tech can reduce our inefficiencies. Like I'm glad you brought up brain focus. That's one. And then for us, when we implemented Sessionboard, instead of going through emails and checklists, I mean, I can share with you my spreadsheet, but it's like literally a bunch of checks that you have to go through. And then sometimes you accidentally uncheck. Sometimes you're like, oh my God, I pressed the space button and accidentally uncheck, and you're like, I thought I did that already. But with the speaker portal, we can just say, hey, log in and, see what's missing and send reminders and track it through there. And I think that's one way to definitely reduce the time that we spend. To go to your question, Chris, about the process that we take, it's a 10-step process, but that in of itself, each of these process has unique subtasks that are associated with them. So don't think it's like one and done, right? So number one, the first phase is call for papers. And I love for Ian to share a slide that I made for you guys so you can follow with me. And it lists out the different steps. So you call for papers. But first, I want to take a step back and just remind our planners to think of your objectives. Think of what the reason why you're doing this event, figuring out your agenda, mapping out the content format, and understanding where you need to plug in the speakers. So you may have a keynote, you may have a facilitated session, you may have a gamified session or a workshop or a panelist or fireside chat. Once you know what you need, then you can go out to, do call for papers, right? And and create categories of what people can apply for, because you don't want to be inundated with all these applications of speakers that are not really useful for you. So you develop a process for call for speakers that's going to be unique and tailored to your agenda. And within that, there's the request, the review, and the approval process. And leveraging event tech to do that is going to be really great as well, because then you can just, do automated, approve, deny, and then have them go through an entire review period with your team members. The next thing is you send out speaker authorization form and contracts.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I heard I thought it was an incredible tip last week where there was a group, and this was with Allison and her team at the Event Content Council. There was a manager who they get 1,500 submissions, but they only have 50 sessions, right? But they still are tagging those submissions that may not be right for a specific session, but they might be right for a white paper or a webinar or a case study or, some other aspect of their, marketing teams, outbound marketing or in-person events or things like that. So I just thought it was a really great, simple use for that information that's coming in. And if, one of the things that we're working on is basically a CRM or a database across your events to be able to also leverage those for future reference. So really great tip from one of the folks last week.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a gap right now in the event tech for speaker management, is the ability to search and categorize speakers across all events. And right now it's all in our brain, right? So we're sitting down with the content team and we're building out the agenda. We're thinking who would be great to speak. That database it's our mind. But when that person leaves, we don't have that think tank and that ability to brainstorm together. So having a system where we can archive, categorize speakers, and mark them for future opportunities, that would be great. So go back to
one comment to that. Sorry, if there's anybody, one of the things that I'm constantly trying to learn, so this is me learning from you, Huong, as well as everybody on there, on here, is what are the things that you are trying to search across events, across your own events for speakers? It could be a topic, it could be experience, whatever. And we don't need to answer it now, but just a plug in everyone's ear that I am constantly looking for that information. So. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, feedback. Like if they're actually really good and the topic that they have is, people can pitch all they want, but when they are on stage in that presentation, is it really going to resonate with your attendees? And so being able to review feedback and their ratings is really good, what Allison said there. And yeah, I mean, a simple search like speakers in AI, speakers in ROI, right? And then being able to open up their session that was pre-recorded or previous sessions that they've done, and review their presentation. Yeah, that's definitely key.
That's great. Mm-hmm. Yeah, more to come there. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so speaker authorization, then you have the agreements, you collect their bios, abstracts, and headshots. And I don't know if you guys go through this when you're doing the event planning, but sometimes their bios are long and it's not relating to what you really want people to know about your speakers, because like for an example, if I'm going to a session and I'm reading the speaker bio, I don't want to hear about them skydiving and that's fun, that's cool, but what do you know about in your career that I want to listen to you for? So there's oftentimes that phase of like are you open to changing your bio? So going back and forth on that. And then the third is you send them the specs, the presentation and the packet with tips and preparation information. This part right here, not a lot of people read their emails for. And I heard Laura said, the biggest complaint is, oh, I didn't know, right? Well, I sent you 3 emails, read it. So this part right here takes a lot of time because you have to remind them, you have to make sure that they actually understand the specs that you're looking for. And then you go through the 4th phase of, sending them those calendar holds and reminders of what you need from them. And then step number 5 is arranging speaker calls to review the presentation. This is done between our clients and the speakers, and we sit in on that. Number 10, I'm just going to jump really quick to number 10 for virtual speakers. If you're doing like a webinar or a virtual event, there's like an additional 6 steps that is then integrated in all of these numbers, the steps here, to make sure that there's, everybody's queued up, especially for pre-records, because you have to do speaker kits and tech checks. Anyway, so once you arrange a speaker call and review their presentation design and content, you go to the final review. And that's
funny anecdote to that is 5 minutes before this webinar, Huong had me clean off my camera. It was great. So there you go.
Yeah, exactly. Because you never know the environments, the glitches, the internet. Yeah, I mean, we didn't really have that. Okay, pre-pandemic, we had live streaming, right? That was kind of like the hybrid version. There was live streaming, there was pre-recording for on-demand publishing, right? Then after the pandemic, there's done dial-ins, like people speaking remotely. Those can be complicated as well because you have an audience looking at your stage, looking at a speaker speaking remotely. And so the internet has to be strong for both us and the speakers on their side. And we've had horror stories, oh my goodness, of, it freezing and then the speaker have to dial back in. And we've all experienced that, right, guys? So that's why the tech checks and for virtual speakers is extremely important. That number 5, arranging pre-event speaker calls is key. Number 6, the final review and collection of presentation. This is when we take all of the presentations, as much as we have them, of course, and give it to the AV company. They test it. if there's any glitches, and they'll call out certain things like, oh, the video is missing, or this graphic isn't showing up, or this link is not working. That's when we fix all of that, or we catch that ahead of time. Now, what happens sometimes, there's those entitled speakers, if I may say, who don't have those slides for you, and then they come on site and they think they can just plug it in. You know what? At those times, we're going to have to set expectations. That is key from an event planner side, is saying, like, what do you call it? Disclaimer. If you show up the day of with your slides, we cannot guarantee, successful output and a successful presentation, and do your best to basically give us what you can. But we've had those situations, and we also prep the AV companies too. So we do this thing called a show flow, and it's basically a spreadsheet that like has the time, the speaker names, the stage furniture that needs to go on, and then like every single minute of what slides needs to be shown. If there's any single gap, if there's a gap in the sheet, we call it out to the AV company. So we do like a pre-event rehearsal call, like where we run through the entire show flow, and we say, we're missing slides here. 30 minutes before, let's sync up, let's see where the speaker's at, and call them to the back of stage, and fill in these gaps as much as we can. So we'll already know ahead of time. If you do it that way, you should already know what's missing to be able to like chase those people down. And then next step is communicate the instructions pre-event. There's, right here, I would say this is where you leverage the event app to do the push notifications, to let people know where the rooms are. Those mapping, like venue mapping functionalities of event apps, are going to be really important, because sometimes we don't know where the rooms are. If it's like a large user conference, like what VMware does, or Salesforce, there's so many different rooms. Being able to leverage those apps is going to be important, because then you don't have to chase them down all the time. They already tell them, download the app, because this is how you're going to get notified. This is where you'll find the rooms. And so you have two ways of communicating with them, both phones and through the app. So then in the know before you go, that, oh my God, that I mentioned earlier in the call, that's where you have to create a single unique document for each one of your speakers. With Sessionboard, we don't have to really, that process is it's somewhat eliminated in a way, because there's already that speaker portal. And then Chris, if you want to share some of your functionalities to help with the know before you go, I'm sure the audience would love to hear that.
Yeah, I'd love to. Before I do that, I am curious, even with Sessionboard or the note, is there a time where you are actually doing any type of check-in with that speaker besides just email? Is it a phone call? Is it, a 15-minute, like, hey, setting expectations? What are some of the things you're doing there?
Yeah, so we have multiple touch points, right? So we, it's not just one single email or one single call, but every week we do a check-in of like how's everything going, and giving them feedback, and then reminding them. And we do calendar holds, multiple calendar holds for rehearsals and on site. Yeah, but I think now with Sessionboard, you can easily automate all of that notification.
Yeah. We definitely try to make that process as simple as possible, but it's really interesting when you're dealing with, to Laura's, issue of, you have people that just kind of ignore, whether it's automatic emails, whether it's SMS that's built into our system, things like that are just great for, pure communication, but there is also setting the tone and the expectation of a level of respect. And so it's interesting to hear kind of how you're kind of doing that along the way. We continue to see value in being able to have a really custom experience for each individual type of speaker. So they know their exact session, they know their specific tips, or specific items that they need to do, whether it's within the platform, or whether it's things like, I have a main stage speaker that needs to submit, a room for the room block. Being able to create those custom tasks for those individuals, as well as like pulling in specific files for those folks, or other specific information, so that they're not having to sift through 10 different emails as an excuse for not getting their stuff. So that's been something we really focus on, but it's really interesting to hear how you are setting expectations for those folks to be able to make sure that they're on top of it.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's communicated throughout. I think the one thing that I want to call to our attention is that a lot of people are getting bored of the conventional format of sessions, right? Like you go to a session, I'm sitting in a breakout, the speakers are on stage, and there's little to no engagement. Sure, you will have some instances where there's Slido, there's polls, there's Q&A, and like stuff like, and trivia, stuff like that. But I'm seeing more of a trend now, especially with the economic downturn and restrictions of budget. Instead of these large user conferences, people are doing smaller regional shows and that are more intimate, like 100 to 150 people, road shows, where they do facilitated workshops, more focus groups, more think tank, and organized networking by profiles and personas that is much more meaningful and impactful in content than going to a large conference and consuming information from a presentation. Now, with those changing content format, it also has to change the way that we manage our speakers as well. So it's not just a typical of, let me get your presentation, your bio abstracts, and you're done. But there's materials now. There's, notepads, there's handouts, there's, giveaways and activities that you have to do on site. So that would require a little bit more adjustment in how we look at speaker management and handle it. And unfortunately, right now, I don't see how event tech could solve that problem. But Chris, I'm going to hand that to you and you can come up with something. But, like for an example, with a facilitated workshop, let's just do gamified sessions where it's a training session and people who come are learning how to grow their department, business, whatever, learn product. And you get a box, and each table there's a group of 10 and they open that box and there's activities in it. How do you really organize that and get that from the speakers ahead of time? And that's something that as event planners, we just need to evolve and, and adapt to those new content format, because I do see a lot of that happening.
Yeah, that's one of the questions as you were going through this list, and I wanted to talk to you about this beforehand, is how much editing are you doing across the board? You talked about bios, having to edit those down. I talked to somebody that used to run very large conferences, and they talked about many of their abstracts had to be edited before sharing. I can imagine you spend a ton of time on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it used to be, okay, so you have your agenda. Like I said, you already identify what sessions you need. You start plugging that in, but the titles don't make sense, right? Content's great, but the title, you need to readjust that. It used to be, we have to kind of rewrite in a way. And not a lot of planners, event marketers are copywriters. So you then have to work with your communications team to cohesively come up with a language that would be adapted throughout all of the descriptions and the content that people would read as they read your agenda and description, right? But thank God with AI, I know you guys hear this all the time, ChatGPT. It's amazing. It's something that you can definitely leverage. And I would say the one added value that you probably haven't heard, maybe have heard before, is prompt engineering. It's really great because if you can tell ChatGPT exactly what to do, it could be more efficient in the output that it gives you. I would recommend using the code generator of ChatGPT. It costs like $20 a month, but it's a tab toggle plugin. You add it to your ChatGPT and it's much more enhanced than the generic version. And you can say, here's my PDF. Here's my agenda, like literally upload documents. You can upload the presentation, upload your agenda and say, I want to, rewrite this session's abstract and title to fit my key messaging, to fit my agenda. And it's amazing. I mean, it's not perfect, but it reduces your time, like literally like in half.
That's incredible. That's really incredible. Yeah. It's pretty amazing across from obviously the AI, we're all talking about that in some way, but even on the event tech side, of course I would say this, and so I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, but how I think it is important, if time and stress are critical KPIs, if you can calculate stress levels, but time of your team is so critical that having a best-in-class software across whether it's registration or mobile or content management, I just think it's so critical, because those are, the things that are really going to push the envelope and really start to eat away at the little things that you all do on a daily basis. So
Yeah, I mean, a case study is we're doing an inaugural program for a new client, and they just, you guys have probably experienced this as event planners, right? Your execs come to you and say, I want to do an event. I want this, this date. And then you have to have the burden of creating the agenda. And you're like, well, what do you want? What's the purpose of the event? So I go to ChatGPT and I write out the situation. I write out the sentiments. I upload a template of, my timing and sessions I need to fill. And I prompt it to give me the output of give me some ideas of the kind of speakers that I need to look for, the kind of topics that I need to have. And it literally just outputs this table. Again, not perfect, but it reduces my time and thinking through it. And a lot of time we have writer's block, right? And you're sitting there feeling like you're stuck. But with AI now, it can push you past the barrier of being stuck. And because creativity is not on demand. It's not like, today I'm going to think of a really cool idea. It doesn't, right? It comes on when, at 2 a.m. in the morning when you're trying to sleep or when you're in the shower. But with leveraging event tech, it can really push you forward a little bit further.
Awesome.
Yeah.
One of the next areas, go ahead.
Yeah. So I was going to say, to finish out the steps, rehearsals and logistics, and then just thinking through how you would rehearse the different content format that you have, especially the facilitated sessions. And then the last thing is engaging in post-event communication. That is super key because you want to have that feedback loop with how you're managing your speaker management process, but also how the speakers are doing. And with a rating system, Chris, if you want to implement that, it would be good, because then the speakers can know how they're being rated so that they can improve, their speaking skill set. And then just overall feedback is really important to have. And then lastly, which I touched on already, is that for virtual events, there has to be an ability where there has to be 6 more steps where you manage all of those editing and live rehearsal and stuff. So, and broadcasting.
The ratings are getting more and more interesting as we kind of dive into that for that cross-event speaker database. So I want to be able to look up a speaker by potentially region, by topic or idea. Say it's AI, that they've talked on X number of panels or given certain discussions, but also have them rank the speakers that come up by sentiment data or whatever it might be. So it's starting to get really, really interesting as we dig deeper into that.
Absolutely.
So the next phase, and I want to make sure we spend a little time on this too, is really diving into some tangible takeaways. You've already given some really great thoughts and prompts on what you do, but I know you had some set takeaways and strategies that you implement when it comes to efficiencies of speaker management. I was wondering if you could go through those for the audience here.
Yeah. So inefficiencies, that word in of itself gives me a lot of stress. And I'm sure it gives, all you planners out there stress too, because there are many moments in our planning process where there's redundancy, right? And when you realize that this is becoming either overwhelming or too much, and you have this mental freeze. And I want to talk about how speaker management can have if you're doing it wrong, it can have a major toll on your mental health. So one of the ways that, and I can share how we reduce inefficiencies soon, but I want to encourage us to delegate, and oftentimes you asked earlier, Chris, of how do you manage this across your team, right? Yeah. There was a comment that was 100 speakers per manager. And then how do you delegate that? I think that's the delegating is important. And how you do that is you gotta communicate. You have to understand people's skill sets and what they want to do. You got to figure out where your resources are. You don't want to delegate to something to someone who don't know how to do it, or they're not enjoying it, or that's going to bring more burden to them. So there has to be a lot of team unity, team cohesiveness, and communication of okay, and a lot of checkups, right? And especially if you're doing a conference with 500 speakers or more, that whole content team, there's a lot of checkups and a lot of sync ups and figuring out who's doing what. And so, because you can't do everything independently. Another thing too is to vent and commiserate, which is why I started with the pain points. Is you come to this webinar, you hear me having those pain points, and I hope that you guys don't, like, the goal is to make you feel like you're not alone. Like, we all experience this BS, right? We all experience this pain point, but also joy too when you see it come into fruition in real life. And then other ways is, with mental health, is setting expectations, which we talked about earlier, Chris, is setting expectations with your speakers, with the AV company, with my clients, with your internal team members of this is where we're headed. This is the trajectory of success if we do it this way. But if there's any moment where you're like I'm seeing a train wreck or this is about to fall apart, please speak up. Like, be encouraged and be empowered to speak up, because the only person that sees that problem is you. And if you don't say anything, then no one else is going to hear it as well. So I would highly encourage people to do that. And so then going back to inefficiencies.
Well, real quick, I would say it's always fascinating to me. And this is one of the reasons why we started the company, was if you think about the number of touch points per speaker, and then you extrapolate that over, 100 speakers, 200 speakers, you can see how quickly the stress levels just rise and the amount of time rises. And in the nature of events isn't that it all happens smoothly over time. It's going to happen like really quick, volcano style. And so that inherently is a recipe for disaster if you don't have the types of strategies that you're talking about, Huong.
Absolutely. And in order to, I think there's a lot of mental evolution that we need to do internally and to rethink and be flexible as we move forward in this ever-changing landscape of events, right? And the strategies that I shared here today has a lot to do with, allowing your brain to adapt to new ways of thinking. So number one is the templates and documentation. That's easy. Like, if there's any way that you can create a template for Know Before You Go, and this is a hack that I did before Sessionboard. So if you can't afford tech, here's a hack. So you go to Google Drive, create a Word doc, but you can also link the data to an Excel sheet so that when the data in the Excel sheet changes, the content in the doc changes as well. Because you don't want to have to go back and manually change 5 different docs if a speaker changes their title or topics or session, right? So what I did was I found a way to hyperlink and code the content and hyperlink it to a Google Excel sheet that if that content changed, it automatically updates the Google Doc for me. And so it's just one source of information. The speaker goes on there and it just has the most up to date, and I don't have to worry about updating. So that's awesome. Templates and documentation is key. Eliminating requirements. So like, be flexible. If you look through your checklist, just put yourself in the shoes of these speakers. Like, holy crap, I have to deliver 10 things to you. And I also have my daytime job, and some of them pay to speak or you invited them. Like, be flexible in having empathy for them on their side and not requiring too much. Allowing speakers to present on site maybe. And I know I talked about the annoyances of that, but there may be some circumstances that you can, it can be excusable, right? And this can be risky. And so just looking at your requirements and figuring out like what is truly necessary for them to give you. Adopting management tools. We talked about a lot of leveraging like Rainfocus or Sessionboard and being able to automate those manual tasks as much as possible, like emails, calendar holds, reminders, push notifications, things like that it would just take those things off your brain so you can focus more on strategy. And lastly, like this is important, is reassessing the agenda. Do you really need, can you reduce the amount of speakers? If this is a panelist, what if you did a fireside chat? What if you did a facilitated workshop? Or thinking through tracks, like, reimagining the agenda. And I want to encourage our planners to do this because, again, like now that events are coming back to in person, there's such a need to engage in a much more meaningful way. And things are becoming more expensive. And so if they're going to come to your conference, let's figure out new ways to deliver that content that is non-conventional, that are exciting and like really drive engagement. So reassessing the agenda is important as well. So those are the 4 strategies. And if you want to learn more, you can definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I can share more. But yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting. Of course, that would come from the tools side of things, but one of the things we didn't talk a ton about is even the amount of time that it takes to update your website or your mobile app with, new information. It's why we focus so much on really quality integrations, but that can, without that, it can run awry pretty quickly, and it takes a lot of times to keep those things updated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do want to make sure that we have plenty of time for Q&A. So Ian, I don't know if you want to come back on, and if we have any questions and things we can answer. Otherwise, we can definitely keep diving in as well.
Yeah, so we went over some of the questions that folks have posted here so far. We did have a few questions that we had generated as well along the way. Finding the right speakers. I mean, I know we've probably touched on that, but just like what to look for in a speaker, really, I guess it's event specific, but if there's anything you can share there, Hong.
Yeah.
I think vetting speakers is a whole new process. As I mentioned, there's so many different criteria that you want to look for, both in the content, that experience that they have in speaking, and they're, I think it's important to look at the previous videos if they have it, or meet with them. There's, for an example, there are up and coming speakers that they're really great and they have potential, but they don't have the past recordings, right? So what we do is we meet with them and kind of get a feel for their energy, basically allow them to pitch to us in person, and seeing what that's like. That's energy and charismatic, but not. There's some speakers that have great content that don't have the energy as well. So what we do with those for our clients is that we recommend bringing in a coach, or like a speaker coach, to work through that content together. For an example, Stanford, the content was very stale. Great speaker, content was stale, but the speaker coach helped reduce their session into 15 minutes, practice with them. And it's an investment on the client side for sure, but it really ensures that the stage presence and everything is like really, really high quality content. Other things we look for is just, the overall key messaging that they have. Is it going to be in alignment with what we want to deliver? And so working closely with them in the specific talking points that they have.
A couple things I heard over the last few months that I thought was pretty interesting, Ian, is that, the content manager who is ever driving content for the organization or for the event had very early on enlisting their other departments to get involved in the process. So what are the questions that the customer success team is hearing? What success has the marketing team had with certain champions, and have they done content before? Even the product team, when they're going out and doing research and talking to other experts, there's a lot of really interesting, champions that can be leveraged for speakers, depending on what the topic is, through your own department. But the only way you're really going to be effective with that is if you get all of those departments involved early on, not just who the speakers are, but the type of content that you're trying to portray at your event. I also thought, Huong, it was really interesting. You mentioned, and this goes in line with reassessing the agenda, turning into these workshop components. I'd love your thoughts on this, but it seems like when you go from a main stage speaker to a workshop, there might be a different skill set that is needed. You go from kind of a dynamic presenter versus to a facilitator. So that might be a really interesting way to, leverage maybe internal team members that are good facilitators. They just may not have the stage presence.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we've attended and conducted several facilitated sessions. The facilitated one is less of a speaker speaker to audience. It's more of this energy that is driven by the person on stage to really call people out, create a comfortable setting, a safe setting where everyone's familiar and connected, that they can actually participate. And we've seen that done very effectively with the incorporation of like games and competitions even, and comedy. So just rethinking the format would really also help with like eliminating some of those annoyances in speakers, but bring on new challenges too, right? There's new challenges to those type of content format.
Yeah, it is interesting to hear some of the new critique on length of time of presentations, and it's kind of obvious, but when you start to see the stats, I think Freeman just put out some stats on where the optimal amount of time is for any type of maybe keynote or whatever it might be, and it's likely shorter than what a lot of sessions we're attending are.
Yeah. And, we have a situation where, like, speaking of time, a lot of times you have Q&A sessions. There are some speakers that are comfortable with Q&A and some that are not. And so you have to understand where those comfort levels are and the requirements. And then there are some speakers that will, totally go off the rails and not be in alignment. So I think we just got to be very aware and pay attention so that you can catch these things ahead of time before they happen, and then pivot. So in case if a speaker goes over, how do you pivot from that? You obviously play music or hold up signs and have the timer. Work with your AV company to make sure that everything is in alignment, and then shift everything down if something goes over. So a lot of our jobs can't just be controlled by processes. Processes help us stay within our lines and our boundaries and protect us, but at the same time, there are so many things that can happen that we just need to be prepared to adapt to and to pivot to.
And I would assume that's why groups hire folks like you, is to be able to kind of guide them along the way, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot that we do. And with, I think right now the event tech that we have onboarded, like Sessionboard and Smartsheet, and Google too, have really helped us streamline that process. But I think what could be created more in the future is that on-site management of speakers would be important, is like how, the feedback, or calling them out, and because right now we're using event apps, like mobile apps. So being able to integrate that, there's just so many opportunities for event tech to help planners out.
That's awesome. Ian, any others that jumped out at you?
Well, you kind of just got into it, but dealing with speaker emergencies, just any tips on how to handle those, especially last minute emergencies?
Yeah. Absolutely. There's situations where a speaker can't show up, and you have to just plug someone in immediately after that. And so several events that we've worked at, there are backups and alternatives. So we just let alternative speakers know, like, hey, and obviously not the ones that are not coming to the event. Like, we want to work with people who are that we've confirmed that are already there, to just say, hey, there might be a situation, like basically, what do we call it? We call it like contingency scenarios. Like, in case a speaker doesn't show up, we'd like for you to be prepared to share something along these lines. So we always have that prep. Rehearsal time, it's really key to identifying some of those issues ahead of time. The importance of rehearsal, making sure everyone feels at ease between the clients and the speakers. And then when they don't show up, we give them a call. We say, hey, like, are you ready for tomorrow? When are you coming in? Let's do like a 10-minute sync up, even over Zoom or over the phone. And if you want, we always have an hour before the show starts, just for any last minute stuff that speakers feel, jitters that they want to come in and test. So that 1 hour is for them. And then we also allocate rehearsal time during breaks and meal times. So it's not just a day before, but working with the AV company to be more flexible and opening those hours. That will save everybody time, as well as like being able to see those unforeseen issues.
That's great. Ian, anything else you got?
I mean, that's it from the questions I was able to conjure ahead of time from folks. Yeah. So unless anyone else has anything here in the chat they want to share, I think.
Yeah. Ian, why don't we kind of remind them on how to get the resources that Hong shared? I think that these are really awesome. And Hong, I'm sure you'd be available if people have any questions about those resources too.
Yeah. I also want to leave the audience with just the send-off message that change is constant in life. There's always going to be things that you plan for, but I heard this really cool quote at SEMA. I'm sure you heard it too, Chris, from the keynote speaker at the end, where like project plan is fiction because it hasn't happened yet. It's change is going to happen. So even though you have these processes and you're planning things, there's always going to be something that's going to go wrong. And as planners, rely on that truth. And so there are, daily things that I do that, I encourage my team members to do to have these mental health and to try to like stay ahead. So number one is obviously think of all the contingencies that's going to happen, maintain industry knowledge, which is great that you're attending these webinars, that what's, the trends and the up-to-date insights. Prioritize and focus. That's really important. Not all speakers are created equal, right? There are speakers that unfortunately more important than others that require hands-on and like VIP treatment. So you got to prioritize and focus on like who you need to spend more time with. Embrace event tech. I know that's a lot of learning curve and investment, but I think that if you don't have the budget for event tech now, start figuring out and learn how to get your executive buy-in to have a bucket for that. Event tech, not only for the event planning process, but event tech for the attendees as well. And for the sponsors, like that is a must-have now. I mean, you got your budgets, right? You got your AV, venue, food and beverage, that's typical. But now I'm seeing and encouraging a lot of my clients to have a major investment value in the event tech. And then lastly is be resourceful and delegate, like figuring out what you can take on yourself and what you can lean on your team members to do. So it's all about being smart, strategic, and creative with what you got. And so that if you can come from a standpoint of those of that mindset, then you can innovate and you can really enjoy what you're doing. And so for me, my whole spiel of what I personify is passion. And I encourage people to do what they have passion in. But in order to have passion, you got to eliminate all those stress, all those inefficiencies. So I hope that this webinar has been really helpful for you. If you want to connect with me, I'm available on LinkedIn. I can talk to you guys about the Google hack that I shared earlier with being able to code so it automatically update for those of you who don't have the budget for event tech right now, and any other questions that you might have. I'm here.
Well, Hong, the passion definitely comes out when you're talking. And part of my goal was to really just let you riff off of some of these problems and challenges. And I thought it was really awesome. I think the quote, the keynote at SEMA used was the famous quote from Mike Tyson that says, everybody has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. I think they use that. It's
yes.
a great quote.
That is a good quote.
Yeah,
I can see that.
About contingencies and then refocusing your time really quickly.
Yeah. I love that.
Well,
so what you're seeing on screen here, it's a QR code. Please scan it, fill out a survey on how we did for you in this webinar. And I'm going to send you the PDF of the 10 steps and the 4 strategies. If you didn't already screen clip it, I'm pretty sure you have if you're listening in. But anyways, I can send it to you. I love to hear your feedback though. Please share with me your thoughts.
Yeah, and absolutely us as well. I think for me, the call to action is to share your thoughts and experience with me. So you can just email me, Chris at sessionboard.com, if you ever have 5-10 minutes to do that. And then if folks are interested in Sessionboard or want to learn more, it's just sessionboard.com/contact us. So we'd love to chat. Whether we're a right fit or not, it still helps us make the platform even better.
Great.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining and tuning in. And hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Ian.
Have a
Thanks
great
so much.
week.
You too.